Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to learn about how to do the web development setup on Windows. Now don't get scared when I say Windows. Windows is still predominantly the largest platform of choice for most of the developers. Most of the large enterprises as well as the banking and financial industry, they use Windows. So Windows, if you are using Windows for development, that's perfectly fine. So for the development setup, there are primarily 3 or 4 things we need. First is we will install Git. Second is we will install Node.js, which will automatically install NPM for you. Now I'll explain these terms. If you do not know what are these, I will explain these terms to you and then we can get started. And third is VS Code. So these are the primary things we will be installing today, and how to do the setup, how to link each other, this kind of things. Now for repository we will be using GitHub. Now I'm not going to cover how to commit the code and how to push and pull. These things I will create a completely separate video to learn about GitHub, learn about Git in details, but today we'll be just doing the setup, right? So what is the first thing is what is Git, right? So Git is basically a version control system. Now what the hell is a version control system? So version is basically you have a piece of code. Say you have a piece of code, it can be anything, and say every day you come and modify this piece of code, right? You write the first line, you write the second line, third line. So in actual project, right, it's not like you complete the project in a day, right? You take months or years to complete the entire project. So every day you're going to commit a few lines of code. Say you write 200 lines of code today, you write 200 lines of code next day. So, and this is not like you are the only developer who is working on the project. There may be tens of developers working on the project, and everybody is committing different lines of code. So if I want to go back in time and say 1 month back somebody has committed some code and I want to make a modification or see who has committed those codes or at what point of time who has done what changes, if I want to see all those things, that is where versioning comes into picture, where it maintains a version of file commits or code commits in the repository, and you can go back in time and see who has committed what point of time, who has committed what lines, all the changes you can see, right? So that is what we call as versioning. So it puts a version number or a revision number, what we call, for each commit. So what is a commit again? So commit is when you are pushing your code from your local to your server, or you are committing a code to be pushed to the server, we call it as a commit. So Git has a terminology called as commit. So again, I'm not going to the tech details in this video for Git specifically. I will create a separate video on that, but basically just know the terms. So if you write a piece of code in your local, so this is your local machine and you want to push it to the server. When I say server, it's a repository where you actually keep the code. In actual projects, you don't keep the code in your local, right? You're done with the coding, you've written some code, you want to push it to the server. So there are different repositories available. You have Bitbucket, you have Git, I think you have GitLab. So tons of repositories are available. So say example, if you're using GitHub, where you're storing the code, so your code needs to be pushed from your local to your remote server. This is called the remote server, which is the GitHub in this case. And this way of pushing the code, it's called push. So when you pull the code from remote to your local, this is called a pull. So these are the main things. And when you're pushing, before pushing the code, you have to do a commit. So you do a commit and then so do a commit and then you push the code to a remote server, right? So this is the basics of what is a Git, what is a GitHub, what is version, what is code commit, what is push, these kind of things. Again, not covering hits. So this is the first thing, we'll be installing Git. So doing all these things, we need Git. So we'll be installing Git. Second is Node.js, which is the development environment. So whenever you're using any kind of third-party libraries, you need to install those libraries from NPM, and for that you need Node.js. Node.js is the platform or the running environment where your code will be compiled and code will be built and executed. So that's the environment of your choice. So in this case, we'll be using Node.js, and VS Code is basically your IDE, and you can choose whatever IDE you want, but in this case I'm using VS Code because it's free. And I think it's good enough for getting started. Even in enterprises, people do use VS Code. It is still, though being free, it is still one of the best I think IDEs on the planet from free perspective. It is almost in lines with some of the corporate or some of the commercial tools. So I think VS Code is just fine if you are getting started. For a few years, I think VS Code will just get you by. So let's get started. So first thing we'll be downloading is VS Code. So you can simply type VS Code and open this up. So VS Code is from Microsoft, so you can directly go to code.visualstudio.com/download, and this will download the version. So you can choose your Windows, Linux, or Mac version. In this case, Windows is the version. Just download it, install it. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just an editor. It's like Notepad++. So once you download and install it, you will get something like this. So if you type code here, after installation, you will get Visual Studio Code. So once you start the IDE, it looks something like this. On the left, you have the Explorer and you have the search functionality, and then you have the source control. So this is something important when once we are going to connect with Git and commit our code. So that will come in the probably in the next video. But in this video, it's like just learn the basics. Then you have run and debug when you're running a local server and debugging it. This is what you will be using, and there's a lot of extensions, right? You can have different kind of formatters and linters. Those kind of extensions are available here, and you can even have our own terminals. If you type if you just go to terminal and click on new terminal, this will open up a new terminal, and here you can choose or you can run the project or do any kind of computations on the project, any kind of compiling, debugging. You can do it here. For example, let me check my Git version, right? So if I just type say Git version, it says the term Git is not recognized because I don't have a Git install. So I'm going to just close this terminal here. And the beauty of VS Code is you can actually open multiple terminals. So I can click this and I can click another terminal, and this will keep on opening a multiple PowerShell terminals, and that's the beauty of it, right? So you can close and you can say example, if you want to run your application one terminal and run your test cases in another terminal, you can create two different terminals, one for test cases, one for running the environment. If you're doing any kind of automated testing, you might need to use a third one. So those kind of things you can do on VS Code internally without using any third party terminals or editors. Okay, so now we'll be installing Git, and then we'll see how the whole thing works, right? So let's go to Git. So here what I can do is just type Git download. These are all public libraries and available in public, so don't worry about it. So just go to git.com download, or just type Git download in the search engine, and you can open it up. So here I will click Windows and I will install the 64-bit version. So I've already downloaded it. So depending on your system, you can use the 32 or the 64-bit version. There's also a portable version, but what we'll be doing is doing a local setup. So we'll be going with the standalone version. So this is my Git 64-bit, and I just not sure that I don't have Git installed. So I'm going to install this. So double click install the normal process. You can put a link on the desktop if you want, and here are some of the questions, like whether you want to associate the git or the sh files with bash and all. The sh files, remove it, because sh is not just for your project. There could be other files you might need to edit and you don't want to associate with git bash, right? But git configuration files are it's fine to be associated with git. So you have open git bash here, you have open git GUI here, some of the options. Add git bash profile to the Windows terminal. If you want, you can, but there is no compulsion about it. This one is scalar is not needed. So I think just you don't need all these options. Just keep the associate git and basically the links, right? The Windows Explorer integration, that's all you need. Even the Windows Explorer integration you don't need all the time, but you can it's good to have actually. So let's click next, and here you can choose what will be the editor. So generally Vim is the editor of choice for Git's default, but what we can do is you can use VS Code as well. So here, since we have already installed VS Code, and that is why I wanted you to install VS Code first, you can use Visual Studio Code as a Git's default editor, right? So you can do this and then click next, and then you have the option like what will be the branching purpose. Now when you're talking about Git, when you're pushing a code for the first time, it needs a branch to push the code, right? So your repository needs to have a basic branch. Now by default, there are two branches we always talk about. One is develop, one is master. So master is basically what is your production code, develop is your daily development environment, and then you create feature branches for individual developers, right? So here Git says like, what do I want to use, override this. So you can override your one. By default it will just use master, so by default you just create one branch which is a master, and you will push it there. So we'll just keep it for now. This does not matter, because most of the times we will be creating the repository first in GitHub, and then we'll be starting with our local development, so we can control all those things. So let Git decide, we'll keep it like that. Use Git from Git bash only, Git from command line also third party. This is needed because if you want to run Git from within say VS Code or your Windows terminal, you will need this option, or else you won't be able to access Git from outside Git bash terminal. So we will be using the second option. Now this is important, right? Then again, don't bother about this one. You can just use the bundle one SSH, so you won't be using SSH at this point. For most of the times you don't need SSH until unless you're connecting to an external server. SSH basically is a file transfer protocol, so you will not need that for your local development or putting to cache, putting to Git. So again, certificates, I will just keep it OpenSSL. Okay, so this one is again Windows style or command style, Windows and Unix style. So if you are using just Windows for your local development, again, doesn't matter what is in your server, what is in your cloud, those things doesn't matter. If you're using just your Windows for development, then you can just use this version. If you're going to use a mix of Windows and Linux for your local development, where sometimes you're using a Windows, sometimes you're using a Linux for the same code base, then you might use the second one. By default here we'll be just using the first one. Here you can use mint tty for git bash. I think for git bash we can just continue using the small one, because there's something which we will not be using most of the times, so you can just use mint tty. Yeah, we'll keep this one. So again, these kind of things I will continue, I will cover in the next video, like what is merge, what is, conflict resolution, those kind of things. Just keep the default one, fast forward or merge. Credential manager, you can use Git credential manager. This will keep your, so when you're installing Git, and if you're using some kind of repository like GitHub, you will have a username and password, and Git will kind of remember that. Like when you're pushing for the first time, it will ask you to set it up, and then you will remember that, so that every time you don't have to type in the username password. And we'll be using the Git's default credential manager to store that information. So next, enabling file system cache, it's fine, you can just keep it. No need of experimental or pseudo features, and that's all. So there are a bunch of steps in Git, and I think I've tried to explain more or less what each step does and what each feature or each option does. But you don't have to worry about most of these things. You can change this later if you want. For first, we just install it and see if Git is running, and we are able to access Git or not. Okay. So finish. So my Git is installed. So once the installation is complete, you will see something called as Git bash here, and you can double click on this. This will look something like this, and you can go and check the Git version here. You can see the Git version. You can also check from VS Code. So if you're running VS Code before the installation, you need to quit the VS Code first and then reopen a terminal of VS Code, or else it will not reflect. So once you reopen VS Code, you just go to terminal and you can test the same thing. So this should also work outside your Git bash. So that is another option we selected, right? Where is Git accessible from within the Git bash or outside Git bash? So you remember we choose an option like that. So these are the options you need to choose at right times, because these will be needed when you're actually doing the development. So now my VS Code is done, my Git is done. So what about my node? So let's see. So by default, if you're using a terminal on Windows, you can just do CMD, and this will open the command prompt, and you can check like any kind of terminal things you need. So I will just check if I have node installed in my system. So I don't have node installed, right? So let's go and install node.js. So node.js installation is very simple. Let's start with that. So we'll just go to node.js download, and you can see download node.js. Just look at the link at nodejs.org. As long as this is good, you're good. Then you can just choose your Windows version. So we'll choose x64, my 64-bit. Click on download node.js. So stick with the latest version, but I think we'll just choose the LTS version. So there are different versions of Node environment based on what kind of development you're doing. So Node environments keep on changing every year. There are new versions and new releases coming. This depends on what kind of libraries you're using. Their dependencies. Each library will have a different dependency. This was built on this Node version, so it cannot be compatible with the previous version. So for general usage, just stick to the LTS version, and you should be good. So we'll stick with the latest LTS version, which is v20, and we'll download this one. And I've already downloaded this here. So we'll go to downloads and kind of install it. So this is my latest v20, and if you want, you can go with the non-LTS version as well, but we'll be sticking to this one. So click next, next, next. Simple thing, nothing complicated here. It will install in C program files, Node.js, and that's fine. Here you will see that this add to path is selected, which means it will automatically add it to the path of your system environment variables, or else you will not be able to access it from outside terminals or third-party terminals like VS Code. So this is fine. You don't need chocolate. So once it's installed, it should be available from your terminal. So we'll try that option. Okay, so it's done. We'll close everything. We will open VS Code here, and we'll see. Right, so let's close all these terminals, open a fresh one, and I can type node version, and this should show up my node version. So I installed version 20. Along with this, you also have the npm version. So you can install the node version, npm version like this. There's a simplest way. There is a little bit of complicated way, a little tricky way of doing it, which I will show you as well. So instead of going via installing via this, what you can do is you can use something called as a package manager. So you have a pre-built installer where you install it. You can install binaries, and then you kind of compile and all those kind of things. You can install the source code. So this is the installer is a simple one, but there is something called installing via package manager, where you can install via winget. So winget is already, I think, default available on Windows. So this is like a I don't know, it's like a tool to install software from different sources, which is inbuilt on Windows. You can use FNM, but for FNM, I think you have to install FNM. So you can use a curl command for installing FNM. So I can share that command with you. I think this is the command. So you have to first go to PowerShell and install this FNM first, and then you can use this FNM to install it, right? So once this is executed, you just copy this into a PowerShell. So you open PowerShell and you copy this, and this will install your Node.js from there. So this is a third way, or there is a terminal way of downloading Node.js. The only issue with this one is this will not set the path variables. That is something you have to manually do. So how do you do that? I will show you that. So if you can just type in env, it will show this option like edit the system and variables, and then you will see an option called as environment variable. So once you have done it via this method, not via the direct download, you have to go and edit the path variables. So you need to go and find out where the actual node is installed. Once that is done, you can go to this path option, click on edit, and here you have to go and add this Node.js path. So whatever is your path of installation for Node.js, that path you have to add it here. Then it will be accessible from outside terminals and outside like VS Code or other terminals, or else it will not be accessible from outside. So this thing you have to manually do. But if you do, as we saw, if you download the exe file and install it directly, this is automatically taken care. So there is a simple way of doing it. Let's not make our life complicated. Whatever is available, just use it. On Linux, you don't have much of a choice. You have to install it via terminal and set the path. But I think the steps are a bit different, which I already covered in a separate video. So if you want watch my YouTube video on development setup environment on Linux, those are in detail explained. But in this Windows video, I'm going to stick to Windows. So I think now we have installed Node.js, NPM, and VS Code, and we are good to start development. So the pushing part of how to push your code to GitHub and all those things, that I will I've already have a separate video on how to get started with Git, but I will create a detailed video about Git in general, like how to push the code, pull the code, merge conflicts, those kind of things I will show in details. So just keep watching my channel. Thank you.